The object of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other bastard die for his. That was George Patton. My name is Kevin, and this is History Goon. I know I've started an episode like this before. Not doing George Patton yet. I just found an awesome quote because the guy was kind of a quote machine with stuff like that. This week, we are going to talk about a couple of just generally badass guys that served in the army during World War II. Not like that narrows it down or anything, but if you saw the title, you're going to realize. Our first one is Leonard Funk. He was born in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, which is a quiet little town just down the Monongahela. Not the Monongahela River. Monongahela. It's a quiet little town just down the Oh, damn it. Just down the Monongahela River from Pittsburgh. He was born there in 1916, and little did the Funk family know that this bouncing baby boy that they would bring home with them August 27th, 1916, would become one of the baddest sons of bitches in the history of the entire state of Pennsylvania. And that's saying something, because Fred Rogers is from Pennsylvania. And I dare you to find someone more badass than Mr. Rogers. I'll wait. Welcome to the neighborhood. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr., or Leonard as he would become known, had a pretty normal childhood. Nothing really that I found kind of stuck out as being abnormal. But again, he was born in the 19-teens, so we can kind of imagine what kind of childhood he would have had. Probably not a lot of timeouts or being told to talk about his feelings. You know, mom and dad were probably not big proponents of be like, hey, I know you're having some big feelings right now. This is more knock your shit off kind of feelings. That continued up into the late 80s and early 90s. Ask me how I know. Anyway, Leonard wasn't what most would consider to be a real big fella. Full grown, he stood at a towering 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed in at 140 pounds. Huge, massive dude, just jacked to the teeth. He's built like my mom. Well, he's 4 inches taller than my mom. Or, basically how I would have been built in like 5th grade. Oh, I might have been bigger than 140 pounds in 5th grade. Anyway. So I'm not real sure if he didn't finish high school or if he was trying to continue his education, but he was attending school for adult learners in June of 1941 and decides, school, basically, I'm going into the army. And right after he made that decision, he went immediately to the closest recruiting office, which conveniently for him, he'd see some action shortly. At the age of 21, he ripped through basic recruit training. He then heard rumors that there was a new program that paid better than just being any old grunt on the ground. So from here, he would attend airborne school at Camp Blanding, Florida, and he was assigned to Charlie Company, 508th Parachute Infantry, 82nd Airborne. Hard-charging, skull-crushing, ball-smashing, death from above. An absolute nightmare for the Nazis. And this was actually the first of the parachute regiments to form at Camp Blanding. And I personally don't think that the 82nd Airborne gets the same kind of attention as it should because of Band of Brothers, which I know sounds weird, but that was all focused on the 101st Airborne, who, yes, I'm not going to say anything, total badasses, but I think a lot of people watched that and really locked in on the 101st. Oh, these guys are the best airborne there is. The 82nd was pretty damn good too. I mean, anybody willing to jump out of an airplane with everything they own strapped to their leg, land, hopefully not break anything when they land, and then get up and shoot people, pretty badass, comparatively. You know, I personally wouldn't jump out of a perfectly fine airplane unless I absolutely had to, but you'd also be hard-pressed to get my ass in an airplane. Anyway, he's not going to be in the United States for too much longer after getting out of jump school because there was no Nazis here to kill. I mean, I guess there kind of was Nazis here. There's Nazi sympathizers here. But they're not really anyway. He ships off to jolly old England with the rest of his regiment, where they did further training to get ready for the invasion of mainland Europe. He thought this is a pretty good idea, considering the US has already invaded and conquered England, so this would probably be the next most obvious target. Now, when you picture the invasion of Normandy, June 6, 1944, you're probably thinking mostly of the actual beach landings, with guys coming out of Higgins boats and having to fight up the beach through machine gun fire and barbed wire and artillery and all of that. Like, yes, crazy people are doing this because they have to. And you don't really think about the guys that jumped out of airplanes during that. Again, unless you've watched Band of Brothers. And then that's all you think about when you're thinking about this part of it, because that's the only part of it they show in the movie. In the series. Paratroopers didn't have it any easier than the guys charging up the beach. So now Sergeant Funk and his boys jumped out of an airplane about 40 miles inland. So they landed about 40 miles inland. Nobody that jumped out of the plane over Normandy landed where they were supposed to, because, you know, between wind speeds and having to jump out earlier than expected due to a lot of like anti-aircraft fire and stuff like that, they were jumping all over the place. And the stories of guys landing and, you know, finding dudes that they have never met before that are in like different divisions, different companies, stuff like that, those are true. Where you'd have some dude from like the 82nd land with a bunch of dudes from the 101st, and they're like, I guess we're going to hang out until we can figure out what the hell we're doing, because we're at least on the same team. And nothing with any of this jump went according to plan. So when his group jumped, the plan was to kind of fight back towards the beach and take out as many artillery positions as they could on the way. When Funk hit the ground, he damn near broke his ankle, but that would not be enough to take him out of the fight. It wouldn't even slow him down, to be completely honest. They would spend the next 10 days carrying out night raids, blowing up 88mm artillery pieces, and making it miserable to be German and in France at the same time, which is good. That's a good thing to do. It's already miserable enough to be French. So I'm allowed to say that. My family came here from French Canada, so at least they had the common decency to leave mainland France and not, you know, be that kind of French. We're hockey French, not smelly cheese French. Which I'm not sure if I've mentioned this or not. The the way that the population of Quebec exploded the way that it did with Europeans was because there was a bunch of dudes that were sent over here as fur trappers and loggers and stuff like that. And they kept getting into fights in town with each other and the natives. So somebody in France decided it'd be a really good idea to load up all the streetwalkers, the prostitutes, or whatever we want to call them, load up a bunch of them on a boat and ship them over to Quebec. And if I wanted to trace my bloodline back far enough, I could probably find somebody with, you know, a similar appearance to me. Yeah. So when they link back up with the main invasion force, his stick, which is, so sticks were your jumping group. His stick checked in as full. Not something that many others could claim. He didn't lose a single man during the drop or in the fighting afterwards. For his leadership and bravery, tenacity, all of that, during the fighting back to the sea, he would be awarded the Silver Star and promoted to first sergeant. Now, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. We got a promotion, got a nice new medal. We've still got fighting to do. What's kind of funny is while he was in France, he picked up a nickname. His guys started calling him Napoleon, not just due to his size, but also his leadership skills. And the whole Napoleon being short thing is British propaganda against the French, which, I mean, I'm all for that, believe me. But he was most likely pretty average size, like 5'6", 5'7", which was normal for the time. It still is. Like, I think the you know what? ADD break. So from what I could just find on this quick little ADD break, for like the US, Canada, France, UK, that area, average height today is anywhere between 5'7" and 5'10" for men. So Napoleon was probably somewhere in there. But again, it was British propaganda. So, you know, like, oh no, you could have just been like, he smells, because he probably did. And he wrote a bunch of like nasty letters to his wife about when he was coming home from fighting, saying, hey, I'll be home in 30 days. Don't shower. Gross. I'm pretty sure you can find those letters. I'm not going to do it right now, though. So from here, after we've invaded Normandy, he's about to catch a break, because he would be involved in the largest multi-day airborne invasion of all time, Operation Market Garden. So this is a day off compared to Normandy, right? Yeah, not quite. This was designed by British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who, again, depending on who you ask, is either one of the most brilliant minds that the British military has ever produced, or he's a buffoon. From what I've read, I tend to think buffoon, but that's me. This is the we're going to win the war by Christmas guy, and I'm also not going to take any advice from U.S. High Command on how to do things guy, because I know better, because I'm British. What was supposed to happen with Operation Market Garden is that Allied paratroopers are going to jump from planes, the Germans would poop their pants and surrender, but since World War II didn't end in 1944, we can assume that that didn't work out the way they wanted it to. 1,500 planes flew over the Netherlands, dropping men from Arnhem in the north to Eindhoven in the south. They got it pretty rough. They were the only ones that would have to fight the SS when they hit the ground. And Operation Market Garden, we've covered before in the Pat Glover episode with Myrtle the Parachicken. There you go. So if you've seen Band of Brothers, again, I'm going to bring that up again. The 101st Airborne landed in Eindhoven and had a pretty gnarly fight on their hands. Our guy Funk in the 508th and the 82nd Airborne landed in the town of Nemagen. And they were supposed to take a bridge to cut off the Germans and allow Allied armor to come through on the roads, because the land itself was too soft for the very, very heavy machinery to cross through the fields without getting bogged down or breaking down, something like that. Which is one thing that we did better than the Germans when it comes to tanks, is with the Sherman, they didn't hold up as well in fights as like the Panthers did, but they were cheap enough that we could make replacement parts, whereas the Panthers were not. So if you blew the tracks off a Panzer or something like that, it was just dead, because they didn't have the ability to get replacement stuff for it. Whereas the Shermans, welcome to America. We throw money at our problems when it comes to the military. And we could just produce hundreds of thousands of extra tracks. And then they're being shipped to England because the Brits are also using Shermans. So we can just store them there. And then if we need them, we ship them over. Supply lines are awesome, unless you're German, and then your supply lines are not so good towards this part. So they would actually jump on the first day of the invasion in 1944. For the first time in the war, everyone, which 90% of his group, landed within 2,000 feet of the drop target, which is impressive because that does not happen in World War II. This wasn't necessarily a good thing because with everybody landing in like a fairly tight group, that made it really easy for the Germans to like pinpoint landing zones and pepper the Allies with small arms, mortar, and you can also direct tanks in pretty easily that way too. So Funk's group particularly were ordered with taking on a couple of anti-tank guns to kill the crews because they are hammering the U.S. gliders as they're coming in trying to land. As disappointing and disheartening as this operation would go on to be, it wasn't for lack of trying on the part of the 508th. Funk and a small contingent of his squad charged the gun emplacements, hurling grenades and then mopping up the Germans in the positions with automatic and semi-automatic fire. He led his men to kill 20 Nazis and didn't lose a single man on his side. For this, he would be awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest award for badassery that the Army offers. Now, that's not enough. We've been through Normandy. We've been through Market Garden. Why not keep going? I mean, we're still in Europe, right? We may as well just keep fighting. So he is, at this point in time, he's still an NCO, which means he's working for a living. He's not an officer that's going to be able to sit back at like HQ and look at maps and give orders and drink coffee. He's out here fighting people because he wants to be out here fighting people. He continues his tour de killing Nazis across Europe. Next stop is Belgium in the winter, which is bad. He's headed for one of the most brutal fights of the war. There's a push being made from Belgium into Germany, and this causes something called a salient, which I'm pretty sure we talked about in the Francis Pegamagabo episode, where a salient is when you push through the enemy lines in one particular little area where it creates, like, if you're looking at it, like there's a line here, right? And you push through and it creates a bubble, or maybe like a bulge, if you will, in the enemy lines. And this just so happened to be in the Ardennes forest. The big problem is that airborne troops are not equipped to fight against armor or in the winter. So they're about to have a very bad time. Airborne troops were deployed here to fight off what would become the last big push that the Nazi war machine would be able to muster of the war. This battle here, this is where Leonard Funk becomes immortal. Yeah, he fought at Normandy and he did some wild stuff there. Yeah, he jumped into Belgium and had to fight the SS. This is where he makes his bones, is during the Battle of the Bulge. He's not the only one, but he's the only one we're going to be talking about right now. A lot of these guys became legends because of this, but we're not talking about them right now. We're talking about Leonard. Not in the fighting, his XO, which is an executive officer, was killed in the fight, and he decides that he is the captain now. He ends up taking command and starts looking for some guys to help him assault the town of Wholesome. And unfortunately, finding nobody, he has to improvise. So he goes into the clerk's office to try to see if anybody's penciled in to, come back to the front. And he thought, there's a bunch of riflemen in here just standing around doing clerk duty and supplies and shit. What if I were to, steal a Dick Winters line here and tell him, hey, you're a rifleman first, a pencil pusher second. So grab your stuff and let's go. He rounds up about 30 of these semi-non-combatants, or in the words of the supremely talented Ben Thompson over at badassoftheweek.com, the Renegades of Funk. If you have never read any of the badass books that he's written, or been to badassoftheweek.com, or even listened to his podcast called Badass of the Week. He is a fantastic author. He is my style of author, where there's a lot of words in there that I usually censor out for YouTube and whatnot. But it's a lot of fun to read about. He's going to lead these boys on a little adventure. He grabs these guys and they assault this town through waist-deep snow and just a bastard of a blizzard. And the late Christmas gift the Germans had for them, artillery strikes. Lots and lots of artillery strikes. Trees are bursting around them, throwing pieces of shrapnel at the ragtag crew of warriors, but that wouldn't stop them. They had Leonard Funk at the helm. They attacked the town, clearing house after house and collecting German prisoners like Magic the Gathering cards. All in all, they came up with 80 German captives, and this would not quench the thirst for dead Germans that Leonard Funk had. He left 4 of his guys to keep an eye on their new friends, and he took the rest of the force to continue the attack. Unfortunately, the Germans are a crafty, some may say sneaky people. A group of Germans in winter camo snuck back into town, and since there were more of them than Americans, the Germans throw down an Uno reverse card. So after a little bit into this attack, he decides to return to check up on the prisoners. As they approach, they see men in white capes with white helmet covers that look like those worn by American troops. But these are not American troops. He slings his Thompson and walks up to the men, only to have one of them turn and stuff an MP-40 into his stomach. MP-40, if you're not familiar, is a German submachine gun. So here, I'm going to do a little copy-paste of some military documents, and then we'll come back to hear the eyewitness version afterwards. Quote, an enemy patrol by means of a ruse succeeded in capturing the guards and freeing the prisoners, and had begun preparations to attack Company C from the rear when First Sergeant Funk walked around the building and into their midst. He was ordered to surrender by a German officer who pushed a machine pistol into his stomach. Although overwhelmingly outnumbered and facing almost certain death, First Sergeant Funk, pretending to comply with the order, began slowly to unsling his submachine gun from his shoulder, and then, with lightning motion, brought the muzzle into line and riddled the German officer. He turned upon the other Germans, firing and shouting to the other Americans to seize the enemy's weapons. In the ensuing fight, 21 Germans were killed, many wounded, and the remainder captured. First Sergeant Funk's bold action and heroic disregard for his own safety were directly responsible for the recapture of a vastly superior enemy force, which, if allowed to remain free, could have taken the widespread units of Company C by surprise and endangered the entire attack plan. Now, that is the official version. The very dry version, because that's how government paperwork is generally. It's just very, this happened, and then this happened, and then this and that. It's boring, right? The eyewitness account goes a little bit like this. The German officer started yelling at him in surprisingly German. Funk didn't grow up in the right part of Pennsylvania to know German, so he did the polite thing and just smiled and nodded. The officer kept yelling at him to the point that Funk lost control and started laughing. The officer started getting a little pissy about this and starts yelling more and even louder. And he kept telling him he didn't understand what the he's saying. So the situation got a little awkward. And some of the surrounding Germans started laughing too. The officer looked at his men with what I can only guess was absolute disgust. Leonard Funk was still laughing as he whipped his Thompson around and unloaded a full stick magazine, which is 20 rounds, into this Nazi's guts. He reloaded quick as a flash and kept shooting. As Germans died, his guys picked up guns and kept killing. In under a minute, 21 Germans laid in the snow with steam rising from their wounds. Another 24 were recaptured. The Battle of the Bulge marks the last of First Sergeant Leonard Funk's major contributions to the war. He left military service in June of the same year with an honorable discharge. This, however, was not the end of Leonard's story. After separation, he continued serving with other members of the armed forces by working for the Veterans Administration of the VA until his retirement as a division chief of the Pittsburgh Regional Office after 27 years. He continued to live out his life in his hometown in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania. America's Napoleon died November 22nd, 1992, comfortably in his own home. Leonard Funk never married and had no kids. Still, there were a lot of fond memories of a man who had a great respect for others and cared for them genuinely as people. First Sergeant Leonard Funk rests in Arlington National Cemetery, where he earned the right to be. During his illustrious and short career, he was awarded the Combat Infantryman Badge, Parachutist Badge with 2 combat jump devices, World War II Victory Medal, European, African, Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with Arrowhead device and 4 Bronze Campaign Stars, American Campaign Medal, American Defense Service Medal, Army Good Conduct Medal, Purple Heart with 2 Bronze Oak Leaf clusters, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross, and, whatever, is throwing a Medal of Honor too, just for shits and kicks, right? This guy was incredible. He didn't begin his life setting out to be a war hero. His quiet beginnings led to a career that was absolutely one for the ages. He didn't volunteer. He was actually drafted, but he also didn't shy away when he was called to serve. To call him a hero is to undervalue his achievements, I think. To call him a legend is to neglect his memory. His short time in the Army was greater than most would have ever achieved, and to what all should aspire. First Sergeant Leonard A. Funk is and was an American icon. Now, yeah, it's kind of crazy. 35 minutes right there. You're going to notice that this episode's a lot longer than that. It's because we got another guy to cover. Because, Leonard Funk has an incredible story. But so does this guy. And they're both kind of short, from what I could find. So I wanted to just kind of do 2 of them back to back. And have some fun with it, Next up, we have William GH Cercy. And, I've got another quote in here. It's very, whatever, all gave some gave all. In this case, this guy gave the Nazis heartburn, which I love. January 4th, 1923, a regular little boy is born in Corpus Christi, Texas. Warren, oh, what a name, Warren Gamaliel Harding Searcy. Had, a normal childhood. He would go by Harding, being the name of the 29th president, who actually passed away later the year that he was born. The only thing that really stuck out in his childhood was a just incredibly wholesome moment when he was 12 years old and he got himself all decked out and looking good. He got on his little church suit and he went to the corner store and bought a bouquet of flowers and a carton of ice cream and marched himself down to the front door of his friend Margaret. When Margaret answered the door, he asked her to get her mom. The flowers and ice cream were for her, after all. You're probably thinking little Warren G here is working his game. He's going for an older woman. Not quite. He had come to the door and asked for her daughter's hand in marriage when she turned 18. He was 12. She was 9. 3-year difference isn't really all that weird. But what is weird is a 9-year engagement. It's like Roy and Pam from The Office. And shockingly, 9 years later, when she was 18, they actually got married, which is impressive, especially when you kind of look at it through the perspective of today, where most marriages don't last that long, let alone, long-term dating isn't really a thing anymore for some reason, because unfortunately hookup culture has become way more cool than just not having sex with complete strangers and getting to know people and building a relationship. Tinder is evil. Anyway, moving forward to March 1941, Harding strolled down to the recruiting office and joins up with the Army. He wants to fight, but at this point, he wasn't really allowed in a combat role because Black folks weren't really allowed to fight in combat. They were kind of relegated to like support roles like cooking, cleaning, supply clerks, stuff like that. That is until General Leslie J. McNair, who's the commander of the Army Ground Forces, decided that if these guys wanted to go into combat and fight and die for their country, they should be allowed to. Yeah, absolutely. As a country, we kind of made that mistake in World War I, where if you just so happened to be black and wanted to go fight for your country, you better hope that you were French, because you weren't fighting for us. We'd send you to France to fight for them. Including a guy that I have on my list who is a bad motherfucker. Oh my God, just unfathomably badass. When you earn the nickname the Black Death in Europe, that's pretty cool, you know. And then you get to come home and work as a elevator doorman until you die in poverty, because, you know, it's the 40s and you just so happen to be black. We kind of suck sometimes, you know. No, I'm not saying white people. I'm saying like our government sucks. Anyway, so the only caveat to this whole like we're going to let African Americans fight thing is they've got to do it in their own units. We're not. Hey, let's not go crazy. We can't let them be associating with whites after all, because that would be unheard of. Why would we do that? So they have to be in their own units, but they can still fight. That's totally fine. He was assigned to the 761st Independent Tank Regiment. The word independent is... the word independent in there isn't really as nice as it sounds. It just means that it was a segregated unit. I'm sure it probably had a different nickname, but I'm not gonna wager a guess. There's a word in there that I'm sure was used quite frequently. Just because they're segregated doesn't mean they're not about to just kick the unfiltered dog shit out of some Germans. There's another segregated unit that I want to cover at some point in time, where there's a couple of very specific guys in there that I want to cover, but honestly, the entirety of the infantry regiment deserves to be covered, and that's the 442nd, which were all Japanese Americans that volunteered to go fight, but weren't really allowed to in some aspects because of Pearl Harbor. So we can't send these Japanese guys to fight the Japanese because, you know, they may see another Japanese person and go, oh, and defect because they look like them, even though they've been here for generations and speak better English than some of the white folks that are there. So they sent them to Europe, and they dog-walked the Germans, including one guy that came back and became like the first senator from the state of Hawaii after he had served like, I don't know, 10 years or something like that as the senator for the territory of Hawaii. He's a bad man. God damn, I can't wait to talk about him. So yeah, they're stuck in a segregated unit, which sucks, but they had a badass name and a badass motto. They were called the Black Panthers, and the motto was come out fighting. And the unit as a whole would do exactly that, becoming well decorated, including having a member earn a Medal of Honor during the war. Which again, for an African American to win the Medal of Honor during World War II, he really had to go above and beyond the call, because they just refused to give them the Medal of Honor. I've covered a guy on here, Edward Carter, that he was early on, like he was like, man, like first 10 episodes early on, that fought his balls off during World War II, that didn't end up getting the Medal of Honor until he was dead, like 20 years. And it was awarded to his son because they finally went through a bunch of war records and found that I think there were 7. There was 7 that qualified for it. No, there was 10 that qualified for it, 7 that received it, I believe. But the only reason that they weren't awarded them in the first place is because of the color of their skin, which is retarded. Like 100% the stupidest shit. So by most accounts, it seems like our buddy Harding here had been hiding a deep-seated craziness. One of his unit mates said, quote, he wore horn-rimmed glasses and had these baby cheeks with soft fuzz on his upper lip that never survived into a proper mustache. He was a quiet, easygoing, polite, and meek young man. But you know what they say, still waters run deep. That was him outside of combat. Once shit got hairy and bullets were flying, he was a completely different person. The 761st had been given an all-expenses-paid trip to beautiful, tropical, northern France. And they were assigned to the 3rd Army of the European Campaign. That is Patton's 3rd Army, just as a heads up. So the tie into George Patton at the beginning, having a cool quote, that's all the justification I need. He was kind of skeptical about the fighting ability of black troops because, you know, they're obviously not going to be as good as white troops and all that. And he got to watch them fight, and he changed his mind pretty damn quickly. That's one of the things about Patton that it seems like it didn't matter what you looked like. As long as you were willing to take the fight to the Germans, he was going to be pretty cool with you. Patton got a really good look at the willingness of these men to fight during, Normandy and the Ardennes and all that. You know, kind of spots where there was very few casualties in the war, obviously. You know, the 761st fought for 180 straight days. Not saying that they were in combat, like traveling through areas for 180 days. 180 days straight of being in direct combat in one way, shape, or form. That's insane. Harding and his Black Panthers ran into some action on November 7th, 1944, in the French town of Moignovic. Oh, man. That's a bunch of words. So they ran into some fighting November 7th, 1944, in the French towns of Moignovic, Vic-sur-Soleil, and Mauryville-l'Évêque. Sure. And then on the 10th, he kind of lets his crazy out a little bit to take control. They're cruising along, just kind of minding their own business when some shithead German unleashes an ambush on the tank column and dog company that was traveling with them. He climbs out of the tank with nothing but his .30 caliber rifle and a really bad attitude. He charges the German lines alone, blasting bad guys and trying to save as many Americans as he could. He was headed back to his tank when a German pops up out of the hedges with a Panzerschreck. And he Panzer-wrecks his tank with a rocket. Which is play on words. Panzerschreck, Panzer-wreck, you get it. So he's just about back onto the tank when it hits. So obviously, he can't get back into the tank because he just got blown up. From here, he climbed onto a Jeep, back when Jeeps were cool and didn't have rubber ducks on the dashboard and saw dirt roads occasionally. Looking at you, Wrangler owners. You're in a cult and you don't even know it. Anyway, he manned the .30 caliber machine gun, which Jeeps today don't have either, by the way. Lame. And starts dispensing freedom in a very rapid fashion in the direction of the Germans. He made sure, specifically, that the Panzerschreck team got theirs first. From here, after killing God only knows how many Germans, he orders the Jeep forward. When he charged the enemy lines, he noticed that the Germans had a forward recon team that was sending back coordinates to either a mortar or artillery team. Nobody knows which one, because Warren, Harding, Cersei sent them all to meet Jesus. So, did those coordinates get there? We don't know. Did he send a bunch of Germans to the afterlife? Yes. The very next day when traveling, they were flagged down by an infantry lieutenant who had gotten himself lost of the 26th Division. He was headed back to a hill that had seen some fighting, and he wanted to get a better look at it and figured that the best way to do that is to inconvenience a whole ass tank column. The ground was kind of soft since there hadn't really been a good freeze yet. Any of my listeners in the northern half of the country will understand. You got to let the ground freeze before you start doing stuff outside in the winter. Just don't expect to dig anything up because it's not going to happen unless you have, a backhoe or something. So the ground's not frozen. It's also covered in snow. American tanks had pretty narrow tracks, and this made it really hard for them to travel on terrain like this. This is somewhere where the Germans did excel with their tanks because the Panzers and Panthers and Tigers had much wider tracks, so they could go across stuff like this with no problem until they blew a track off, and then they were just a lawn ornament somewhere. So they got bogged down in this really nasty weather a few times, and as they moved up the hill, Cersei told his driver, Henry Tyree, that he was going to get out and ride on top of the tank to get a better feel for the environment. As they broke from the tree line, the shooting started. Under direct fire, Cersei started banging on the hatch and ordering Tyree to back up, which he had already started doing. Unfortunately, he backed up into an anti-tank ditch that had been covered in snow. He slid back down into the tank and right into the lieutenant's lap. So Cersei now snatches up the phone and calls for another tank to get up here for backup. Thankfully, they were just under small arms fire and nothing's getting through. So they're just taking rifle fire at this point in time. And this rounds are just pinging and wanging off the outside of it. Nothing's really getting through. A few minutes later, the other tank shows up and they're still under some pretty heavy fire. So Cersei climbs out of his tank and runs to the other. He unhooks the winch, runs back, and he's still getting shot at as he hooks onto his tank. As his rig is getting pulled out, he climbs back into it, just as an armor-piercing shell glances off the hull of the tank. Had this been a square-on shot, this episode would have been sponsored by Tostitos Chunky Tank Crew Salsa. Tyree again tries to get out of the way. Well, not really out of the way, more kind of in the way, I guess. He's trying to position the tank between the Germans and the infantry guys that are trying to get him unstuck. Again, Cersei climbs out with his rifle and starts killing Germans. Over the course of the next few hours, it became all hands on deck to get this tank and the crew out of this ditch, and they keep coming under fire. During one of these exchanges, he sees one of his guys get hit. This made him slightly upset, to the point that he charged a machine gun emplacement by himself and killed everything inside of it. He charged a second one with much of the same effect. After the second one of his guys saw him with his rifle slung in his back, carrying an MP40. He then noticed out of the corner of his eye another emplacement containing anti-personnel troops. It's not specified, but I do know that something that would be considered anti-personnel that could fit into a smaller emplacement like this would be a flamethrower, which is horrific. So either way, another tank commander had to literally pry this MP40 out of his hands and throw it in the snow when he was done. Another account says that when the fire started, he climbed up on top and mounted the 50 caliber belt fed and just started laying into these Germans, and that he had to be pried off the gun, not the other way around. The second one came from the unit historian, so that's probably the more believable of the two stories. So from here, he didn't see much more action until after the war, when he was assigned to be a prison guard for the Nuremberg trials, which I'm sure that the Germans were just absolutely tickled pink to be taking orders from what they would have referred to as a mud person. I do like the idea that maybe, just maybe, he had a run-in with this that miserable bitch Irma Grease, though, who we just talked about not that long ago in our last World War II episode that we did. What a terrible person. Anyway, after the war, he went back home where he was no longer the baddest man in the 761st. He's just another black guy in the South in the late 40s, and he was treated as such. Basically treated like a second-class citizen, um, not treated like a person. And he kind of decides here, to hell with this, I'm going back to war, because at least there I'm treated like an equal. And he re-enlisted to go fight in Korea. In 1952, he was outside of his tank when he was hit with a Chinese mortar shell and severely injured. He'd be shipped back home and bounced from military hospital to specialist to doctor for the next 10 years. He would die in his home in 1976 as a war hero and one of the first African Americans that would actually be allowed to fight for his country. So his story is obviously not as uplifting and happy as Leonard Funk's, but there's also the whole like, hey, racism was a thing. But anyway, I wanted to just cover a couple of guys that I didn't have a ton about for either one of them. But just really fascinating stories, because you get to see the same conflict from the same side from two different perspectives, I guess would be the way to put it. But yeah, that and, talking about good guys for once is kind of nice too. Even though the last couple, last week weren't good guys. One of them was. Well, a few of them were, but the main focus of the story was not good guys. So anyway, that's what I've got for you guys this week. I appreciate you for coming back and continuing to support me. We're kind of starting to wind down. We're about halfway through season 2. So trying to get some ideas rolling for season 3, because I think I've got enough to close this one out. But been kind of thinking about it. Like, what's the future of this show? What are we going to do moving forward? I think we're going to see some changes with season 3. I've been thinking about some stuff as I get closer to it, where kind of thinking about trying to maybe kind of shorten some of the episodes, because I know that not everybody can sit and listen to an hour and 45-minute episode or an hour and a half long episode. So I'm going to try to narrow them down to like that hour 10-minute kind of mark for next season. Maybe some other production stuff, maybe some other changes I'm not 100% sure about, but it's going to be different. It's going to be the same, but also different, Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling and babbling. patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month gets you early access to History Goon. It gets you early access to Guestnicity with Luther. It gets you early access to Almost Fiction with Chase. It gets you early access and backdoor access to the Never Daily. Also gets you early access and backdoor access to 911 calls with the operator That's a pretty good deal. $5 it is. I can think of a lot worse ways to spend $5. But if you want to support me directly, go over to Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/History Goon Pod. Any donations there go directly to me as the creator, and they'd be greatly appreciated. You don't have to. If you don't want to give me money, you could give me a better gift, which is spreading the word about the show. Tell folks like, hey, it's a pretty decent show. He also has a YouTube channel if you want to look at his ugly face and see all the goofy pictures and video clips that he puts in. So there's that too. But anyway, until next week, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world, just like both of these guys. Okay, love you.